I should have left this story in the shadows where it belongs. For years I convinced myself that silence was the only way to survive what we endured in the wilderness of 1893. But as I grow older, the burden of memory grows heavier. It gnaws at me in the sleepless hours, reminding me of the faces of those who never walked out of that forest. 27 of us entered. Only 8 emerged, and I am the last of those 8 still alive to speak of it. It began with the excitement of a new hunting expedition. That year, whispers traveled through our small town in Pennsylvania about untouched wilderness further west, in the mountains where few dared venture. A place rich with game, where deer and elk roamed in endless herds, where rivers ran thick with trout, and where a camp established decades earlier by trappers supposedly remained abandoned, waiting to be rediscovered. Men talked of pelts worth fortunes, of bringing back meat that would last entire winters, of exploring lands most settlers had never set eyes on. I was 22 at the time, restless and eager to prove myself. When the idea of a large hunting party formed, I volunteered immediately. 26 others joined me. Seasoned trappers, farmers hungry for profit, young men like myself chasing adventure, and even a handful of Civil War veterans who claimed no forest could frighten them after what they'd seen on battlefields. We gathered supplies through late summer: rifles, axes, tents, dried provisions, and barrels of salt for preserving meat. There was laughter in the air as we prepared, though beneath it all I sensed something desperate, as if each man wanted to escape something waiting for him back home. Some were fleeing debts, others failed harvests, and a few were running from memories. I thought little of it then. I only knew we were going into the wild as a band of brothers. On the morning of September 3, 1893, we set out. Our convoy of wagons creaked under the weight of supplies. Horses snorted clouds into the crisp air. Townsfolk waved as though we were marching off to war, not realizing how fitting that image would become. Children chased after us for a short distance, laughing and calling, until we turned onto the old timber road that wound into the dense pine forests. The forest greeted us with silence. Not the ordinary quiet of trees, but something heavier, as though the world itself were holding its breath. The towering pines closed overhead, their boughs blotting out the sun, their trunks crowding close together. Every sound, our footsteps, the creak of wagon wheels, the snort of horses, echoed strangely, swallowed quickly by the stillness. We marched for hours that first day, spirits high. We sang old marching songs, shared jokes, and spoke eagerly of the abandoned hunting camp we hoped to find. According to rumor, trappers had built it before the Civil War and mysteriously vanished. Some said disease swept through them. Others whispered of raiding parties or wild animals claiming the camp. None could say for certain, but we told ourselves the stories were only tales meant to frighten children. That first night we made camp by a stream. Fires burned high, meat crackled over spits, and whiskey passed between hands. I remember lying awake in my bedroll, staring at the stars through the trees. The forest seemed endless, ancient. I felt both small and invincible at once, as though nothing could harm us while we were together in such numbers. The next day, however, unease began to creep in. By noon we found the first sign of something unusual. A tree stripped of bark in jagged claw marks far higher than any bear could reach. One of the older men, a trapper named Harlan, muttered that no animal he knew of left marks like that. The veteran scoffed, saying it must have been a prank by some other hunting party. But no one had been out here in years, or so we believed. We pressed on. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the forest became. The pines grew thicker, their needles muffling our steps. Sunlight dwindled until it felt like dusk even at midday. Birds were scarce. I realized with a start that we had not heard a single bird call since entering. The silence pressed against my ears until I longed for any sound, even the cry of a crow. That evening, as we set camp again, a strange unease settled over us. Fires burned lower than before, and conversation dwindled. Some men claimed they saw shadows moving between the trees. Others dismissed it as nerves. Still, no one wandered far from the firelight. I tried to shake the feeling, but as I lay awake, I swore I heard footsteps circling our camp, soft, deliberate, always just beyond the edge of light. On the third day, one of the younger hunters vanished. His name was Samuel, a boy no older than 19. He had gone to fetch water at dawn, and when the others woke, his bucket lay overturned by the stream, but he was nowhere to be found. We searched for hours, calling his name, firing shots into the air, following footprints that led into the pines before vanishing abruptly. That was the first time I felt true fear. The veterans grew grim, their bravado fading. Harlan spat and declared we should turn back, that the forest wanted us gone. But others argued that Samuel had simply wandered off and lost his way, and that turning back would make us look like cowards. After heated debate, we pressed on, though unease gnawed at every step. Stranger signs appeared as we advanced. A deer carcass hung flayed from a tree, its organs missing, its hide stretched neatly as though by a human hand. But none of us had killed it. We found boot prints in mud, though too large and too deep for any of our party. One evening, we came across the remains of a campfire, its ashes still warm. Someone else was out here, though we never saw them. On the sixth day, we reached the place marked on the crude maps, a clearing where the old hunting camp should have been. Yet what we found chilled me more than if the place had stood in ruins. For there was nothing. No cabins, no fire pits, no tools. Only bare ground, as though nothing had ever been built there. Trees stood unnaturally spaced, almost in a circle, their trunks blackened as though by fire long ago. The men muttered uneasily. Some swore they felt eyes watching from the tree-line. We decided to camp there regardless, telling ourselves it was only an empty clearing, nothing more. But that night, the forest came alive with sounds. I woke to the distant crack of branches. Then came whispers, too faint to understand, yet unmistakably human. I sat upright, gripping my rifle, scanning the darkness. Shapes flickered between the trees, vanishing when I tried to focus on them. I thought I saw Samuel's face for an instant, pale and twisted, before it disappeared into the gloom. At dawn, 2 more men were missing. Their bedrolls lay empty, their rifles untouched. No one had heard them leave. Panic spread through the camp. Some demanded we flee at once. Others argued we should stay together and hold our ground. Voices rose, fists clenched. It was then I realized the forest was not only claiming men. It was unraveling us, setting us against each other. That morning we buried what little hope we had. And though none dared say it aloud, each of us knew something was hunting us in those endless pines. And we had only just begun. We should have fled the moment those 2 men vanished. Every instinct screamed at me to abandon the clearing and retrace our steps, to seek the safety of open land and the thin line of civilization beyond the forest's edge. But pride, stubbornness, and the false courage that comes from traveling in numbers held us fast. We told ourselves that men did not simply vanish into the air, that there had to be some logical explanation. Perhaps wild animals had dragged them off. Perhaps they had deserted in the night. Perhaps they had seen something worth following and gone after it. We clung to those flimsy stories because the truth was unbearable. Something in the forest wanted us, and it would not let us leave so easily. That morning I counted our number aloud. 27 had entered. Now only 24 remained. My voice cracked as I said it, and no one spoke afterward. The silence between us was heavier than the forest air. We decided to search the surrounding woods for signs of the missing men. Small parties set out, each armed and wary. I joined a group of 5, moving cautiously among the pines. The ground was thick with fallen needles, muffling our steps. The deeper we went, the more certain I became that we were being watched. Shadows seemed to shift just beyond sight, and when I turned my head, nothing stood there but trees. After an hour, we found something. A strip of cloth snagged on a branch, dark with dried blood. Not far from it lay a boot, half buried in the soil, as though its owner had been dragged. The trail led deeper still, until it ended abruptly at a circle of stones set into the ground. They were not arranged by nature. Each was placed with careful purpose, blackened with age. Moss grew thick upon them, and in the center of the circle lay bones. Not animal bones, but human. We stared in horrified silence. One of the veterans, a man named Caldwell, spat on the stones and muttered that some devil's work had been done here long ago. Another warned us not to linger. We turned back in haste, hearts pounding, rifles clenched tight. When we returned to camp, the others had found no trace of the missing men. We shared what we had seen, and a shudder passed through the group. Some demanded we abandon the expedition entirely, but others, driven by greed or madness, insisted we had come too far to leave empty-handed. The argument grew heated until it seemed fists would fly. It was only when Harlan, the oldest trapper among us, spoke that silence fell. "Mark my words," he said, voice low. "This place is cursed. The camp that once stood here, it didn't vanish by chance. The forest swallowed it, and it'll swallow us too if we don't get out." For the first time, no one mocked his superstitions. But still we stayed. Perhaps we feared the forest would not allow us to leave even if we tried. That night was worse than the last. The whispers returned, closer now, weaving through the trees as though circling us. The horses grew restless, snorting and stamping, eyes rolling white. I heard something scrape against my tent, slow and deliberate. When I forced myself to look, nothing was there but a long gouge in the canvas, as though cut by a blade. By morning, 3 more men were gone. Their bedrolls were neatly rolled, as though they had stood up in the night and walked off willingly. None had taken their rifles. It was as if something had beckoned them into the trees, and they had obeyed without resistance. Now only 21 remained. Panic overtook us. The veterans swore they had faced death on the battlefield, but never such terror. Younger men wept openly. Some cursed God, others prayed to him. Arguments flared constantly, whether to move deeper and find the source of this evil, or to turn back and hope to retrace our steps. In the end, we did neither. We lingered in indecision, paralyzed by dread. The forest seemed to sense our weakness. On the 9th day, a storm rolled in, blackening the sky. Rain lashed the camp, and lightning split the heavens, illuminating the clearing in harsh white flashes. In those moments of brilliance, I saw figures standing among the trees, tall, still, watching. When the thunder faded and darkness closed in again, the shapes were gone. We huddled together beneath the storm, rifles clutched, too afraid to sleep. When dawn came, for more men were missing. That left only 17 of us. We could no longer deny the truth. The forest was taking us, one by one. In desperation, we decided to abandon the clearing. We gathered what supplies remained and set off eastward, hoping to find the timber road that had brought us in. But the forest did not yield to us. Paths twisted, landmarks shifted. We marched for hours only to find ourselves back at the circle of blackened pines. That was when I realized the forest itself was a trap. The men began to lose hope. Some muttered that we were already dead, that we had entered a place where the living did not belong. Others accused one another of causing the disappearances, of murder or betrayal. Suspicion poisoned us faster than hunger or fear. On the 12th day, one of the veterans shot another man in the chest during an argument. The sound echoed through the trees, and when the body fell, silence returned heavier than before. We buried the dead man shallowly, too afraid to linger over the grave. The killer claimed he acted in self-defense, but none of us believed him. We knew the forest had driven him to it. That night I dreamed of the vanished trappers. I saw them standing in a circle, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. Behind them loomed something vast and formless, darker than the night itself. When I awoke, my skin was cold with sweat, and the fire had burned low. For a moment I thought the dream still continued, for shapes lingered at the edge of the light. But when I blinked, they were gone. The next day, 5 men deserted. They ran screaming into the trees, vowing they would rather face death alone than remain in camp. We never saw them again. Only 12 of us remained. By then, we no longer spoke of hunting. We no longer spoke of returning home. Each day was consumed by survival, by the desperate attempt to hold onto reason while the forest stripped it from us. Hunger gnawed at our bellies, for game had vanished, as if the animals themselves had fled. Water grew scarce, streams turning to trickles, and always we felt the forest watching. I cannot describe the dread that clung to us. It was not the fear of wolves or bears, nor even the fear of starvation. It was something deeper, something primal, as though the trees themselves held a malevolent will. Every rustle of branches, every flicker of shadow, carried the weight of unseen eyes. On the 15th night, I awoke to a sound I will never forget. Laughter. It drifted through the pines, high and childlike, yet filled with malice. It echoed around the clearing, coming from everywhere at once. Men clutched their rifles, faces pale, but none dared fire. The laughter faded slowly, leaving us shaken to our core. When dawn came, 2 more were gone. 10 of us remained. We no longer marked the days with certainty. Time blurred, the forest swallowing it as easily as it swallowed men. But I knew we were approaching the end. Something was drawing us closer to it, step by step, disappearance by disappearance. And I feared that whatever had claimed the trappers long ago was preparing to claim us too. By the time only 10 of us remained, the forest had stripped us of everything but fear. We no longer laughed, no longer sang, no longer spoke of wives or children back home. Each face had grown gaunt, eyes sunken, movements sluggish from hunger and exhaustion. And yet sleep offered no escape, for the forest crept into our dreams as surely as it haunted our waking hours. The morning after the laughter in the trees, I awoke to find the campfire smoldering low and one of the men gone. His bedroll lay neatly folded, his boots still beside it. No footprints led away. It was as though the earth had swallowed him whole. We were 9. We gathered together, rifles clenched, and tried to decide what to do. Some wanted to keep moving east, to fight against the forest's twisting paths until we found the timber road again. Others argued we should stay put, that moving only made us more vulnerable. Voices rose, harsh and ragged with desperation, until I feared we would turn on one another again. It was Harlan, the old trapper, who ended the quarrel. He slammed the butt of his rifle into the dirt and growled, "Argue all you like, but the forest don't care. It wants us gone, either by ground or by grave." None answered him. That day we set out again, moving in a tight group. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of rot, though we saw no carrion. Clouds blotted the sun, and the world seemed locked in perpetual dusk. The silence deepened until I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat and the crunch of pine needles underfoot. We walked for hours, yet every path seemed to curve back on itself. At one point, we stumbled upon the same blackened circle of pines we had found days earlier. My heart sank as I realized we were trapped, caught in some vast loop that had no end. But this time, something new awaited us there. In the center of the clearing stood a figure. It was Samuel, the boy who had vanished on the 3rd day. His clothes were torn, his skin pale, his eyes glazed as if lifeless. Yet he stood upright, swaying slightly, and when he opened his mouth, a low, hollow voice poured out. Not words, but a drawn-out moan that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. One of the men screamed and fired his rifle. The shot echoed like thunder, and Samuel's body collapsed into the pine needles. When we rushed forward, what we found froze my blood. The body was not Samuel's. It was only bones bound together by rotted sinew, clothed in scraps that only resembled his garments. A crude effigy of the boy, left for us to find. We fled the clearing in terror. That night, none of us slept. We huddled close around the fire, watching the shadows. The whispers returned, louder now, threading through the trees like a chorus. I pressed my hands to my ears, but still they seeped in, speaking in voices I almost recognized. My mother, my brother, men I had known back home. They called my name, beckoning me to step into the dark. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, clinging to the pain to remind myself what was real. By dawn, 2 more were gone. No struggle, no sound, only absence. We were 7. Desperation drove us onward. Food was nearly gone, water scarce. Every step felt heavier, as though the forest itself resisted our movements. Branches clawed at our clothes, roots caught our boots, thorns tore our skin. The trees seemed closer together, crowding us, funneling us along unseen paths. On the 17th day, if my count was still true, we stumbled upon something unnatural. It was a cabin. At first I thought my eyes deceived me, for it leaned crooked among the trees, its roof sagging, its walls half collapsed. Moss crawled up its timbers, and the door hung askew. But it was real, a remnant of the vanished camp. We approached warily. The air grew colder as we neared, our breath misting in the gloom. Inside, the cabin was little more than a shell. Broken furniture, a rusted stove, scraps of cloth. Yet symbols had been carved into the walls, strange runes that spiraled and twisted, their meaning unknown. In the center of the floor lay a heap of bones, piled deliberately, as though arranged in offering. We backed away in horror, but one of the men, maddened by hunger, insisted we search for supplies. He tore through the wreckage, overturning rotted crates, scattering bones. That was when the whispering surged, louder than ever, filling the cabin until the walls seemed to tremble. We fled into the forest, dragging him with us, but his mind was already broken. He babbled nonsense, laughed at nothing, clawed at his own skin as though something crawled beneath it. By nightfall he was gone too, vanished while we blinked. Only 6 of us remained. The forest grew crueler with each passing day. Rain drenched us without warning, then ceased abruptly. The ground turned to sucking mud, then hardened into cracked earth. Our compasses spun aimlessly, needles whirling as though drunk. Time itself seemed fractured. Hours stretched endlessly, then vanished in a blink. And always the voices pursued us. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they laughed, sometimes they whispered secrets only we should have known. They knew our names, our sins, our fears. One man collapsed to his knees, begging forgiveness for crimes he had never confessed aloud. When we tried to lift him, he lashed out with his knife, eyes wild, screaming that the forest demanded sacrifice. We left him where he fell, too afraid to linger. We were 5. I no longer trusted my own senses. Shapes darted at the edge of vision. Figures too tall, too thin, their limbs bending wrong. Once, I glimpsed a face peering from behind a tree, pale and eyeless, lips drawn into a smile too wide for any human mouth. When I shouted, it melted back into the bark as though it had never been. By then, I understood we were not merely lost. We had stumbled into something older than memory, a place that fed on men's minds and bodies, that lured us deeper with every step. The vanished trappers had not abandoned their camp. They had been consumed just as we were being consumed. And yet, some force kept us moving forward. Even as terror hollowed us, even as hunger gnawed and whispers tore at our sanity, we walked on. We could not stop. The forest would not let us. On the 20th day, we came upon another clearing. In its center stood a great stone, taller than any man, carved with the same twisting runes we had seen in the cabin. Around its base lay offerings: bones, antlers, scraps of cloth. Some were fresh. We dared not enter, but as we skirted the clearing, I heard it again, the laughter, high, mocking, echoing through the trees. And when I turned, I saw them, figures moving among the pines. Not men, not beasts, something between. They watched us silently, their forms shifting like smoke. And in that moment, I knew we would not all leave the forest alive. Perhaps none of us would. Only 5 of us still drew breath. And the forest was not finished. I have written these words 1,000 times in my head, and still I cannot capture the dread of that 20th day. The image of that stone haunts me more than the faces of the men we lost. I see it even now when I close my eyes. Gray and jagged, taller than 3 men, carved with symbols that writhed if you stared too long. It stood in that clearing like a monument to something no human tongue should name. The runes cut into it seemed to hum faintly, as though the stone itself drew breath. We 5 circled the clearing without stepping inside, keeping our eyes lowered, for we feared what might happen if we looked too long. Yet I could feel it pulling at me, tugging at some part of me deeper than flesh or bone. It whispered not with sound, but with thought, a pressure inside my skull, promising relief if I only knelt before it. We fled that place as though chased, though no one spoke of what he had heard. Fear sealed our mouths. That night the forest gave us no peace. Our fire sputtered and hissed, though no rain fell. The trees leaned inward, their branches groaning as if in pain. And the voices, they were clearer now. No longer whispers, but full words. They called to each of us by name, offering lies in familiar tones. My father's voice promised me safety if I laid down my rifle and stepped into the trees. A dead friend from my boyhood laughed softly, telling me I needn't suffer any longer. One of the men, Thomas, rose in a daze and began walking toward the treeline. We shouted, grabbed at his arms, but he fought like a man possessed. His eyes rolled white, foam at his lips, strength unnatural in his starved body. Took 3 of us to hold him down until he went limp. When we released him, he lay still, chest rising shallowly. By dawn, he was cold. 4 of us remained. I remember staring at his corpse as the sun broke weakly through the clouds, wondering if his death had been mercy. He had looked almost at peace at the end, as though the forest had granted him release. A part of me envied him. We could no longer tell direction. Our compasses spun endlessly. Moss clung to every side of the trees, as though mocking the old woodsman's trick of navigation. When we tried to march by the sun, clouds smothered it. Every trail bent back upon itself. The forest would not let us go. Harlan grew worse with each passing hour. The old trapper muttered constantly, scratching symbols into the dirt with a stick. At first I thought he was praying, but when I looked closer, I saw the same twisted runes carved into the stone. He swore he had seen them in dreams long before this expedition, that the forest had been calling him all his life. He said the camp had never been abandoned, only taken, and if we did not pay tribute, the same fate would befall us. The others wanted to silence him, but I feared he might be right. That evening we heard drums. Low, distant at first, then nearer, steady as a heartbeat. They came from all directions, rolling through the trees, making the ground tremble. We gathered close, rifles trembling in our hands. The fire cast long, flickering shadows, and in those shadows I saw shapes moving, tall, thin, their limbs wrong. They circled us, just beyond the reach of the light. Then came the laughter again, mingling with the drums, rising higher until it pierced the air like knives. One of the men broke. He screamed and fired blindly into the darkness. The forest answered with silence. When we checked, there was no body, no blood, no sign he had hit anything. But when we turned back to the fire, he was gone too. His rifle lay at his feet, still warm. 3 of us remained. We did not sleep that night. The drums beat on until dawn, then faded as though they had never been. We sat in stunned silence, too weary even to speak. On the 22nd day, we found the hunting camp. It should not have existed, for we had searched this forest for weeks without finding it. Yet there it was, a cluster of cabins, roofs sagging, walls dark with age. Smoke curled faintly from one chimney, though no one stirred. The sight filled me not with relief, but dread. The camp waited for us, as though it had been there all along, hidden until the forest willed us to see it. We approached cautiously, rifles raised. The cabins creaked in the wind, their doors swinging open. Inside, dust lay thick, but not thick enough for 3 decades of abandonment. Beds were neatly made, tools hung on walls, food set on tables as though waiting for its owners to return. And yet there were no people, only silence. In one cabin we found journals. I forced myself to read by the dim light that filtered through the boards. The entries began as ordinary notes about trapping, hunting, weather. Then slowly they turned. Complaints of whispers in the night, strange symbols appearing on trees, men vanishing, The words grew frantic, handwriting scrawled, ink smeared. The final entry read, "It watches from the pines. It wants names. We gave them. It wants blood. We gave that too. But it will not be filled. God forgive us." The page ended in a blot, as though the writer had been dragged away mid-sentence. I dropped the journal, hands shaking. Harlan only nodded, as if the words confirmed what he already knew. "It don't let go," he muttered. "Never did." We searched the other cabins and found more signs of sudden departure. Plates mid-meal, chairs toppled, a deck of cards scattered across a table. It was as though the trappers had simply stood up and walked into the trees, never to return. By nightfall, we had no choice but to stay. Our bodies were too broken to keep moving. We built a fire in the largest cabin, barred the door, and huddled together. For a time, silence reigned. But then came a knock. Soft, deliberate. 3 taps against the door. We froze. None of us moved. The knocking came again, 3 taps, slow, measured. Then a voice spoke. It was Thomas, the man who had died 2 nights before. He called my name, begging to be let in, saying he was cold, saying he was hungry. His tone was exactly as I remembered, every inflection, every pause. Yet I had seen his body buried in the dirt. We did not open the door. The voice grew louder, angrier. Then others joined it. All the voices of the men we had lost, crying, pleading, mocking, threatening. They circled the cabin, pounding on the walls, rattling the shutters. We held our rifles tight, praying the barricade would hold. Hours passed in torment. At last, just before dawn, the voices faded. When we stepped outside, there were no footprints in the dirt. 2 of us wanted to run then, to flee into the forest even if it killed us. But Harlan insisted we stay. He said the camp was the heart of it all, that if we left, we would never find our way again. He claimed the stone demanded tribute, that only by giving ourselves could we hope to appease whatever haunted these woods. His eyes burned with fevered conviction, and I began to fear him more than the forest itself. That day, while I gathered firewood, I returned to the clearing with the stone. I do not know why. Perhaps it drew me as it had before. Perhaps I hoped to understand. The runes pulsed faintly, as though alive. I felt them inside my skull, whispering things I dare not repeat. My legs shook, my vision blurred, and I nearly fell to my knees. But I forced myself back, stumbling through the trees until the camp reappeared. When I returned, only 2 men were there. Harlan was gone. The others said he had walked into the forest without a word, carrying only his knife. They had tried to stop him, but he had moved with inhuman strength, shoving them aside. His eyes, they said, glowed faintly in the firelight. Now we were only 3. That night the knocking returned, louder, angrier. The cabin shook as though struck by unseen hands. And this time one of us broke. He rose screaming, flung open the door, and ran into the night. We heard his cries fade into the trees, swallowed by laughter. Only 2 of us remained. I cannot recall the exact day anymore. Perhaps the 25th, perhaps later. Time had lost all meaning. My companion and I spoke little. We sat in silence, rifles across our knees, waiting. The forest no longer needed to hide its hunger. We felt it closing in step by step. I dreamed of the stone every night, of the runes twisting, reshaping into faces I knew. It wanted names. It wanted blood. And I feared the forest would not stop until it had mine. The fire we had managed to build sputtered and hissed in the damp air, its glow pushing back only a fraction of the darkness that pressed in from every side. No matter how close I sat, I could not chase away the chill that seemed to seep not from the night but from the ground itself, as if the soil retained some memory of things better left unremembered. The others had huddled together, their faces pale and drawn, eyes darting to the shadows with every crack of a twig. Even the bravest among us had little to say now. Words seemed dangerous in a place like this, as if they might summon something listening just beyond the line of trees. I could not sleep, though my body demanded rest. My mind was restless, turning over the images we had seen. The strange carvings, the abandoned camp that felt more like a stage than a shelter, the patterns of bones scattered in ways that nature could never arrange. When my eyes did close for moments at a time, I was assaulted by dreams too vivid to dismiss as mere fancies. Faces appeared before me, some belonging to the hikers who had set out with us, others unknown, their features stretched and hollow. In one dream, I saw them standing in the trees, silent and motionless, watching as if waiting for me to speak a word that would release them from their vigil. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat despite the cold. At dawn, the mist lay heavy across the clearing, thick enough that one could not see more than a few yards ahead. The world shrank to a narrow circle of damp air and pale outlines. One of the men suggested we remain still until it lifted, but another argued that remaining in place was more dangerous than moving forward. After a heated exchange that left us all uneasy, we chose to press on. None of us spoke the truth aloud, but it was clear we each feared what might be waiting in the mist behind us more than what lay unseen ahead. The forest grew denser as we walked, the trees crowding close, their branches interlaced overhead like the ribs of some vast beast. The air smelled of rot and iron. Now and again I caught glimpses of shapes among the trunks, shadows that moved against the direction of the light, figures that vanished the instant I tried to focus on them. At first, I told myself it was only fatigue, but when another hiker muttered that he had seen a man without a face standing by a birch, I knew I was not alone in my visions. We found signs of the vanished camp again that day. Not the camp itself, but fragments. Remnants scattered as if the forest had swallowed the place whole and spat out only bones and scraps. A broken lantern, its glass missing. A strip of canvas snagged high in the branches where no storm could have carried it. Footprints pressed deep into the mud, though the ground was long dried. They were too large to be ours, and too heavy, as if whatever left them carried more weight than a man should bear. That night we discovered the pit. It lay in a hollow at the base of a hill, half covered by fallen leaves, so that we might have passed it by had not one of us stumbled near the edge. It was not natural. The sides were cut too clean, too deliberate, the soil packed hard as if shaped by hands that knew the earth like clay. We shone what light we could into its depths, but the bottom seemed to recede farther than our vision allowed. From it rose a smell that turned the stomach, sweet, cloying, and metallic. We dared not linger, yet none of us could look away, and in the silence I thought I heard whispers curling up from the black. I do not know if they were real or born of fear, but the others shifted uneasily, each man straining his ears. One finally muttered a prayer, and we retreated without a word. That night no one slept. The forest seemed to come alive around us, the wind carrying voices that did not belong to any of us, the creak of branches like footsteps pacing in the dark. At one point I heard laughter, low and guttural, rising from the direction of the pit. The others heard it too, for we clutched our weapons and stared wide-eyed into the night, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing came, but the laughter lingered in our minds long after silence returned. The next morning we discovered that another of our number was gone. His bedroll lay where he had slept, undisturbed, as if he had vanished without stirring a leaf. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. Only absence, cruel and complete. We searched until our throats burned, calling his name again and again, but the forest gave back nothing. By then, the group had dwindled alarmingly. The 27 who had entered these woods were now barely more than half, and with each disappearance, the air grew heavier with despair. It was then I began to keep my own secret record, notes scratched onto the back of an old journal I carried. I did not know if anyone would ever read them, but I felt compelled, as though some unseen force demanded a witness. Each page carried the weight of those lost, their names etched in trembling script. I told myself it was to preserve their memory, but in truth, I feared that if I did not write them down, they would vanish more completely, erased not only from the forest but from the world itself. We moved slower now, every sound a threat, every shadow a promise of loss. Our food was dwindling, our strength waning. Yet still the forest stretched on, indifferent to our suffering. At times, I wondered if it had no end, that we had stepped into some other place where time did not flow as it should, where the paths wound in circles and escape was only a lie whispered by the trees. On the 5th night, I awoke to find the fire extinguished, though no one had touched it. The clearing was plunged into blackness so complete I could not see my hand before my face. Then, slowly, faint lights appeared among the trees, pale, wavering, like lanterns carried by invisible hands. They circled us in silence, drawing nearer with each breath. My heart thundered, and I felt the urge to run, but my legs would not obey. The others were equally frozen, eyes wide and mouths open in terror. The lights drifted closer still, until I could see they were not flames at all but orbs of pale fire, each pulsing as though alive. Just as they reached the edge of the clearing, they blinked out, leaving us gasping in the dark. When the morning came, another man was missing, and so it went. Each night brought some new torment, some new proof that we were no longer in a world we understood. Each morning thinned our ranks further, leaving behind only silence where once had been laughter and voices. I began to doubt that we would ever see the edge of the forest again, and in my heart I wondered if those of us who remained were already marked, doomed to join the vanished before long. Yet still we pressed forward. Something pulled us deeper, some invisible tether that would not release us. We told ourselves we sought the truth of what had happened to the hunting camp, to the others before us. But in the secret corners of my mind, I wondered if we were not instead being led, drawn by a will not our own, toward an end we could neither see nor escape. The forest was waiting, and it was not finished with us yet. By the time we stumbled into the next clearing, our group had been reduced to a grim handful. The mist had become a constant companion, moving like breath around the trunks, so thick at times it clung to our clothes in beads of moisture. The silence was worse than the noises we once feared. It pressed on our ears until even the smallest crack of a branch sounded like thunder. We had ceased speaking altogether, our voices swallowed by the vastness. The forest did not want words, it wanted us mute, listening. That day we found what I first mistook for another campsite. But it was too neat, too deliberate. At the center of the clearing rose a crude altar of stone, stacked carefully in a square, its surface blackened with something I dared not touch. Surrounding it were symbols carved into the ground, concentric circles, jagged spirals, marks that shifted meaning as I stared at them. They were not the markings of any hunting party, nor any religion I had ever encountered. The air itself grew heavier around the stones, thick with a copper tang that turned my stomach. One of the men broke ranks and stepped closer, muttering about firewood left behind, about supplies hidden under the altar. He reached for the stones. The moment his hand touched the surface, a sound tore through the forest, a low, droning hum, like a swarm of bees multiplied 100-fold. The trees seemed to shudder, leaves trembling as if in anticipation. The man screamed, though no mark appeared on his skin. He pulled back, clutching his head, eyes wild, and bolted into the trees. We never saw him again. The rest of us could only stare at the altar, unable to move closer, unwilling to retreat. I felt a pull, a hunger from the thing, as though it recognized us, as though it waited. We left at last, but every step felt as though invisible threads stretched taut between us and the stones. That night we made camp on a ridge overlooking a ravine. The mist pooled below us, hiding whatever lay at the bottom. I thought the height would comfort me, but as darkness settled, I began to feel exposed, as if 1,000 unseen eyes stared upward from the fog. Sleep was impossible. My body shivered despite the blankets wrapped tight around me. The wind carried faint sounds, chanting perhaps, or only the shifting of branches, but they threaded into my thoughts until I could no longer separate what was real from what was dreamt. Sometime in the hours before dawn, I rose and wandered a short distance from camp, unable to bear the oppressive stillness. That was when I saw them, figures, faint and pale, standing in the fog of the ravine below. There were many, too many to count, their outlines blurred but unmistakable. They did not move, yet I felt their gaze rise to meet mine, piercing through mist and distance alike. A cold certainty struck me. They were waiting, not for anyone but for us. I staggered back to camp, my mouth too dry to shout. By the time I found the courage to wake the others, the figures were gone. Only fog remained, silent and heavy. No one believed me at first, but as the hours passed, each man admitted to having seen shapes of his own that night. Whether we dreamed together or glimpsed some shared truth, I cannot say. The forest changed again after that. The paths twisted back on themselves, leading us in circles despite our careful navigation. We marked trees with blades, only to find the marks erased when we returned hours later. Food spoiled more quickly than it should, bread molding overnight, meat turning sour despite the cold. Water fetched from streams carried a bitter aftertaste that left us sick. It was as if the forest had grown tired of our presence and began to poison us from within. One morning we discovered our packs rifled through, supplies scattered across the ground. At first we blamed one another, suspicion eating at what little trust remained. But then we found tracks, not human, not animal, but something in between. The prints were elongated, with too many joints, pressed deep into the soil as though whatever made them carried unnatural weight. They circled the camp, spiraling inward, stopping just short of where we slept. None of us dared voice what we thought, that something had been watching, crouched at the edge of our circle, deciding whether or not to step closer. The next disappearance was crueler than the others. A man on watch, sitting no more than a few feet from where I lay, vanished between one breath and the next. I heard no struggle, no cry. One moment he sat sharpening his knife, the next the knife clattered to the ground, blade catching the firelight. When I looked up, he was gone. His footprints ended in the dirt where he had been seated, cut off as cleanly as if the earth had swallowed him whole. We were 7 now. 7 of the 27 who had walked into this wilderness with such confidence. I began to understand that survival itself was no guarantee of safety, that the forest might allow us to walk free only to carry with us something worse than death. It was then we stumbled upon the remnants of the hunting camp. At first it appeared as a scatter of broken structures, canvas rotted to shreds, frames of tents collapsed in on themselves. But as we walked deeper among the ruins, we realized how wrong it all was. The camp had not decayed naturally. It had been dismantled with intent. Poles were broken in the same direction, stakes pulled from the ground and arranged in patterns. Even the ashes of the fire pits lay in lines, as if swept by careful hands. And then there were the bones. Not animal, not entirely human. They lay in heaps, bound with cord, arranged in circles that mirrored the carvings we had seen at the altar. Some were charred, some polished smooth. A few were etched with markings too fine to be chance. My stomach turned as I recognized the curve of a jaw, the socket of an eye. These were no trophies of hunters, they were offerings. We searched the camp in silence, too horrified to speak. Every step revealed more evidence that those who had built it had not lived as men but as supplicants to something else. A journal lay beneath a collapsed tent, its pages damp but legible. I read by the flicker of lantern light, each word clawing deeper into my mind. The hunters wrote of voices in the forest, of dreams that drove them to build altars, of demands whispered in the night. They spoke of the Hollow One, a name repeated again and again though never explained. The final entry ended mid-sentence, the ink trailing off as though the hand had been snatched away. When I read those words aloud, the others demanded I stop. Yet even unspoken, they burrowed into our thoughts, lingering like a sickness. That night none of us could sleep, for every rustle of leaves carried with it the echo of a whisper. The name repeated in my mind until I feared I would scream it into the darkness. By the next morning we were 6. The forest had claimed another. When dawn crept over the forest again, I no longer felt any relief. Light had ceased to mean safety. In truth, the daylight revealed more horrors than it hid. The trees looked sickly now, bark split with strange scars, sap oozing like blood from wounds. Birds no longer sang. Only the occasional hollow knock of branches echoed through the silence, a sound that seemed deliberate, like coded signals passed from one part of the woods to another. We were 6, though each of us walked alone in spirit. We avoided each other's eyes, speaking only when absolutely necessary, our trust shattered. I began to wonder if the forest was dividing us on purpose, gnawing at the fragile bonds between us so that, one by one, it could strip us away. The ground grew uneven, rising and falling in ridges that forced us into single file. Moss covered everything, swallowing roots, rocks, and fallen trunks alike, so that the earth seemed to shift beneath our boots. At times, I felt as though we were walking not on soil but on something living, something vast and hidden just below the surface. Once, when I pressed my hand against the ground to steady myself, I swore I felt it pulse, slow, steady, like the heartbeat of the land. I snatched my hand back and kept walking, but the sensation clung to me, a memory I could not shake. By midday we stumbled upon a creek, its waters black with silt, running sluggish and cold. We dared to drink, though the taste was foul, metallic, and left our tongues numb. It was then that one of the men pointed upstream. At first I thought it was only another boulder, but as I squinted I realized it was the carcass of a deer, half submerged, its legs stiff, eyes gone. But it was not rot that twisted my stomach. It was the carvings on its hide. Spirals, jagged lines, the same symbols we had seen around the stone altar. Something had marked the animal deliberately, as though it too were an offering. That night we did not build a fire. None of us had the will to gather wood, and besides, fire felt useless now, a fragile thing against the enormity of what pressed in on us. We sat in the dark, listening. At first there was nothing but the groan of trees shifting in the wind. Then came the sound of water dripping, steady, rhythmic, though there was no rain. The drops grew louder, closer, until they fell in perfect unison, like footsteps approaching. I clutched the journal I had been keeping, fingers digging into the leather, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. But when I dared to look into the darkness, nothing was there. Morning revealed one fewer among us. His bedroll lay undisturbed, his pack untouched. But a circle of ash marked the ground where he had slept, as though fire had consumed him without flame or smoke. No trace of him remained, only that perfect ring burned into the soil. We were 5. The forest seemed to tighten around us, closing in, branches tangling into nets that caught our clothes and tore at our skin. We hacked our way through, but the effort drained what little strength we had left. Hunger gnawed at us, thirst made our lips crack and bleed, and still we walked, driven by something none of us could name, too afraid to turn back. By late afternoon we reached a hollow where the trees bent inward, their trunks leaning together like conspirators. At its center stood another structure, not stone this time, but wood. A crude cabin, sagging and rotted. Its roof collapsed in places, its walls warped. Yet smoke trickled faintly from a hole in the roof, thin and gray against the sky. None of us spoke, though we all saw it. Against every instinct we approached. The door hung open. Inside, the air was thick and damp, reeking of mold and iron. Strange bundles hung from the ceiling, skins, bones, herbs tied with string. A fire smoldered in the hearth, though no one tended it. On the table lay more bones, arranged in precise rows, each carved with markings too fine for my eyes to follow. And on the far wall, scratched deep into the wood, was a message. "Do not follow the hollow one." The words clawed at me, more frightening than any symbol or offering. Who had written them? When? And why leave them here, where no sane soul should tread? Before we could debate, a sound came from the corner of the cabin. A low rasp, like breath dragged through a broken reed. We turned as one, lantern light swinging. There, half shrouded in shadow, sat a figure. Its body was shrunken, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes sunk deep into sockets that reflected the glow of the fire. I thought at first it was dead, some mummified husk left behind. But then its chest rose, shallow and ragged, and the rasping sound came again. None of us moved. The figure's head lifted slowly, painfully, until its gaze met ours. Its lips cracked open, and in a voice brittle as dry leaves, it spoke one word: "Run." The lantern shattered before we could react. Darkness swallowed the cabin, and in that instant a scream tore through the air, high and piercing, shaking the timbers. We bolted, crashing into the night, branches whipping our faces, roots clawing our feet. We did not stop until the cabin was lost behind us, its smoke curling unseen into the sky. When we finally collapsed, breathless and trembling, one of us was gone. Whether he had fallen behind or been taken, I cannot say. His name I will not write, for I no longer know if names matter here. The forest does not care for them. We were four. The nights grew worse after that. I no longer trusted sleep, for every dream was a mirror of what I feared most. Faces of the vanished appeared, their mouths open, but no sound emerging. The ground beneath me turned liquid, sucking me down as the trees leaned closer, whispering in tongues I almost understood. Sometimes I woke to find myself standing far from camp, journal in hand, pages filled with words I did not remember writing. It was during one of these black nights that we heard the sound again, that droning hum, the one from the altar. It began faintly, almost like the rush of wind, but grew steadily louder until the earth vibrated beneath us. Shapes moved at the edge of the clearing, too tall, too thin, their limbs bending wrong. They stood watching, motionless, until the hum reached its peak. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ceased. The shapes were gone. By morning, another was missing. We were three. The realization struck me then with terrible clarity. The forest was not hunting us randomly. It was stripping us away, layer by layer, until only what it wanted remained. I began to wonder if we were being whittled down, not merely to die, but to be transformed into something else. Perhaps those shapes we glimpsed in the mist had once been men like us. Perhaps the Hollow One was not a single being at all, but all who had ever stepped into this place, consumed and remade by it. We pressed on, though to what end I cannot say. None of us believed in escape any longer. The camp we sought had revealed itself only to warn us away, yet we had not turned back. And so the path narrowed, twisting between trees that seemed to breathe, leading us deeper into a place where even time faltered. The forest was almost done with us, and I began to fear what it would leave behind when it was finished. By the time we reached the deepest hollow of the forest, I had stopped counting days, stopped noting how many remained. There were 3 of us left, me, and 2 others whose names I could no longer summon without trembling. Hunger had hollowed our cheeks. Thirst had cracked our tongues. Sleep had become a stranger. Yet we walked, driven by a force we did not understand, our steps guided by some invisible hand toward a place none of us would have chosen willingly. The trees here grew impossibly tall, their trunks gnarled and twisted, roots rising like the ribs of some buried giant. The mist clung to them, thick and suffocating, and the air was heavy with the metallic tang of blood. The ground itself seemed alive, pulsing faintly beneath our boots, rhythmically, as though breathing. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I could not. The forest did not allow retreat. We stumbled into a clearing, and there it was, the vanished hunting camp. Not the ruins we had discovered before, not the remnants of abandoned shelters, but alive. Every building intact, every fire pit clean, every tool in its place. Smoke rose from chimneys, curling lazily into the gray sky. The forest surrounding it bent outward, as if bowing to the camp, forming a protective barrier that nothing outside could penetrate. And yet it was empty. At the center of the clearing stood a structure we had never seen before. A stone tower, jagged and blackened, its surface carved with the symbols that had haunted our every step. It seemed to breathe, inhaling the mist, exhaling shadows that reached toward the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped closer, drawn to it despite every warning my body gave. The 2 others clung to my arms, eyes wide with terror, but even they could feel it, the pull of something ancient, something that had waited decades for us to arrive. I remembered the journals, the carvings, the words scratched into the walls of the cabins. The Hollow One. We had mocked the name at first, whispered it in disbelief. Now I understood. It was not a man, nor a beast, nor even a spirit. It was the forest itself made conscious, made monstrous. A hunger older than any human, older than the memory of the camp, older than the world. And it demanded tribute. The first of us to vanish was the smallest. One moment he was at my side, gripping my arm with a hand that trembled like a leaf. The next, he was gone. No scream, no rustle of leaves. Only a silence that pressed down on the clearing, thick and suffocating. I could feel the eyes of the Hollow One upon me, and a whisper curled in my skull, insidious and terrible. One name remains. We ran, though the clearing itself seemed to twist beneath our feet, paths bending impossibly, trees shifting to block our escape. Shadows reached for us, long and thin, moving with the speed and cunning of predators. I tripped, fell, and felt hands, cold, insubstantial yet strong, grip my shoulders. I screamed, and the forest laughed, a sound that echoed through every hollow, every root, every stone. I do not know how I survived the night. Perhaps it was mercy, perhaps it was exhaustion. When I awoke, I was alone in a hollowed pit, the mist curling around me like a shroud. The tower loomed in the distance, silent now, as if waiting for the next foolish traveler. My two companions were gone. I do not know if they were taken that night or in some night before. I dragged myself from the pit at dawn, my body weak, my mind teetering on the edge of madness. I had seen what remained for those who did not escape. Forms of men twisted into something else, hollow-eyed and faceless, moving silently among the trees, repeating gestures we had once made, trapped forever as extensions of the Hollow One's will. I kept walking, though I no longer knew direction. Days passed, or were they hours? Until I stumbled onto the remnants of a trail that led beyond the forest, where sunlight fell in slants and the air tasted clean. And then, I saw them, 3 figures moving toward me. Not hikers, not men, not survivors, but the forest's creations. Their faces were pale, their eyes empty, and yet they mimicked the expressions of men I had known. They did not speak, but the hunger in their gaze was unmistakable. I ran and did not stop until the trees thinned and the first semblance of civilization rose before me. A homestead, fences, smoke from chimneys. I collapsed at the edge of a road, half blind, delirious, and someone came to help me. They took me in, fed me, clothed me, asked me questions I could not answer. I gave them names and dates, told them I had survived an accident, claimed I had become lost. I could not speak of the forest, not fully. How could I? Who would believe the truth? I later learned that only 8 of the 27 had emerged. I was among them. The others, those who had survived long enough to be seen by the outside world, spoke little of their ordeal. Even now, I do not know all their names, for the memories are fragments, broken and bleeding into one another. The forest had taken its toll, had rewritten what we were, had left us hollow in mind and spirit even if our bodies survived. I write this now not to warn or to scare, but to record, to leave some trace of what lies beyond the trees, of what waits for the next unwary hikers, the next curious minds drawn into the hunger of the Hollow One. There is no explanation, no logic that will make this understandable. The camp was real. The stone was real. The forest waits, patient and eternal, for names it has not yet claimed. And when the mist curls thick and the paths bend impossibly, I know it will come again. I carry the names of those lost. I carry the memory of their eyes, wide with fear and disbelief. I carry the sense that something ancient, terrible, and unyielding stalks the edges of human understanding. I do not know why I survived. Perhaps the Hollow One was satisfied with numbers. Perhaps it was content with the chaos it had sown. Or perhaps it spared me because I was the one to write it all down, to leave a warning too faint for most to hear. The forest is still there. The clearing, the stone, the cabin, the pit, all of it waits. And I know, as I write these words, that it remembers the names of the 27 who entered its depths in 1893. It remembers, and it will not forget.